A waitress with worn-out shoes slipped a folded napkin to a homeless-looking man in the corner of a five-star restaurant. When he opened it, words made his hands shake. He's poisoning the supply chain. But here's what she didn't know. That homeless man was actually worth £8 billion. And he owned the very restaurant she was working in. What happened next would save her dying brother's life, expose a criminal conspiracy, and prove that one moment of courage can change absolutely everything. This is a true story about what happens when the richest man in the room pretends to be the poorest. And trust me, you won't believe how this ends. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Sometimes the richest people in the world feel the most alone. And that's exactly how Daniel Reed felt on that cold evening in London. Daniel was worth £8 billion. Yes, you heard that right. $8 billion. He owned Reed Pharmaceuticals, one of the biggest medicine companies in the world. From his glass office high above the city, he could see everything. But the one thing he couldn't see was the truth about the people around him. Every day, people smiled at him. They laughed at his jokes. They agreed with everything he said. But Daniel knew something was wrong. These weren't real smiles. They were fake. Plastic. People only saw his money, not him. And after years of this, Daniel felt like he was drowning in loneliness. So he came up with a plan. A test, really. Every few months, Daniel would do something that seemed crazy to most people. He would take off his expensive suits and designer watches. He would put on old, worn-out clothes from charity shops. Faded jackets with holes in them. Scuffed shoes that had seen better days. Jeans that were thin and tired. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a billionaire anymore. He saw someone ordinary. Someone struggling. Someone invisible. And that's exactly what he wanted. Tonight, Daniel was heading to the Royal Crown, the most expensive restaurant in his entire company. It was the jewel of his business empire. A place where movie stars and politicians came to eat. Where a single meal could cost more than some people earned in a month. But Daniel had never actually been there. Not really. Oh, he'd seen the reports. Beautiful spreadsheets full of perfect numbers. His managers told him everything was wonderful. 5-star reviews. Record profits. Happy customers. But numbers on paper don't tell you everything, do they? They don't tell you about people's hearts. They don't tell you who's honest and who's pretending. So there he was, dressed like someone who could barely afford a bus ticket, pushing open the heavy golden doors of the Royal Crown. The warmth hit him first. Then the smells. Expensive wine. Grilled meat. Fresh flowers. Everything was beautiful. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The carpet was so thick your feet sank into it. But when the hostess saw him, her smile disappeared faster than snow in summer. She looked him up and down with cold eyes. Her nose wrinkled slightly, like she'd smelled something bad. "Can I help you?" she asked. But her tone said, "You don't belong here." "Table for one, please," Daniel said quietly, making his voice sound tired and uncertain. The hostess hesitated. She looked around the dining room where men in 1,000-pound suits sat with women in glittering jewelry. Then she looked back at Daniel in his charity shop jacket. "Do you have a reservation?" "No." "Is that a problem?" Her smile got even tighter. "We're fully booked. But let me see what I can do." She tapped on her computer, taking her time, making a big show of how difficult this was. Finally, she looked up. "I can give you a table near the kitchen. It's all we have." Daniel knew what this meant. It was the worst table in the restaurant. The table they gave to people they didn't want. The table hidden away from the important guests. "That's fine," he said simply. As he followed her through the restaurant, Daniel felt people staring. Their conversations stopped. Their eyes judged him. He could almost hear their thoughts. What's someone like him doing here? It hurt, even though he'd expected it. Even though he knew it was part of the test. Because somewhere deep inside, he remembered being young and poor. He remembered what it felt like to be looked down on. The table was tiny and wobbly, tucked in a corner near the swinging kitchen doors. Every few seconds, waiters rushed past carrying trays. The doors banged open and shut, open and shut. It was noisy and uncomfortable. Perfect. From here, Daniel could watch everything. He could see the waiters smiling at the rich tables, practically bowing. He could see the manager, a man with slicked-back hair and a too-tight suit, laughing loudly with important-looking customers. But when the manager turned away, his smile vanished. He snapped orders at the young staff, who jumped like frightened rabbits. Daniel sighed. This was exactly what he'd feared. His restaurant was like a theater. Everyone was acting, playing pretend. The kindness was fake. The respect was bought with money. Is this what I've built? He thought sadly. A place where human beings are treated like objects? He'd been sitting there for about 10 minutes when a young woman approached his table. And something about her was different. The other waiters moved like dancers, smooth and confident. But this girl seemed fragile, tired. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down a basket of bread. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, there was no judgment in her eyes. No disgust. Just kindness. "Good evening, sir," she said softly. "My name is Lucy, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Lucy. The name suited her. It meant light. And somehow, in this dark corner of the restaurant, that's exactly what she was. Daniel looked at her worn shoes, noticed how thin her wrists were, saw the tiredness in her young face. And something shifted in his heart. This wasn't just a test anymore. This girl, this Lucy, was real. And in a restaurant full of fake smiles and calculated kindness, that realness shone like a diamond. He didn't know it yet, but this girl was about to change everything. Let me tell you about Lucy Carter, because her story will break your heart. Lucy was only 22 years old, but she carried the weight of the world on her thin shoulders. She should have been finishing university, going to parties, worrying about exams and boys and normal young person things. But life had other plans. Her younger brother, Tommy, was 15. And Tommy was dying. Well, not dying exactly. But he had a disease called cystic fibrosis. It's a terrible illness that fills your lungs with thick mucus until you can't breathe properly. Every day was a struggle. Every breath was a battle. The treatments Tommy needed cost a fortune. Thousands and thousands of pounds every single month. Their insurance had run out long ago. Their mother had passed away 3 years before, and their father? He'd disappeared when Tommy was born. It was just Lucy and Tommy against the world. Every penny Lucy earned went to keeping her brother alive. Every tip she got, every extra shift she worked, every meal she skipped so she could save money. It all went to Tommy's doctors, Tommy's medicines, Tommy's oxygen tanks. She was drowning in debt, drowning in fear, drowning in exhaustion. And then there was Mr. Harrison. Gerald Harrison was the restaurant manager. A cruel man with a fake smile and cold eyes. He'd discovered that Lucy had made a small mistake a few weeks ago. She'd written down the wrong number in an inventory form. A tiny error. Easy to fix. But Harrison had used it like a weapon. He'd called her into his office and accused her of stealing. He threatened to fire her, to make sure she never worked in any good restaurant again. He said he'd call the police. Lucy had begged him, pleaded with tears in her eyes. "Please, sir. I need this job. My brother, he's sick. If I lose this job, he'll die." Harrison had smiled then. A terrible smile. "Well," he'd said slowly, "maybe we can work something out." He told her she owed him £5,000 for the stolen inventory. He would take it from her paycheck, bit by bit. He would control her tips. She would be his prisoner. And there was more. Harrison had discovered that Lucy had studied accounting at university before she'd had to drop out. He made her stay late after her shifts, forced her to help him with secret bookkeeping. Numbers that didn't make sense. Invoices from companies that didn't exist. Money disappearing into hidden accounts. Lucy knew something was very wrong. She knew Harrison was stealing. But what could she do? If she spoke up, he'd fire her. And if he fired her, Tommy would die. So every night, she went home to their tiny apartment, climbed into bed fully dressed because they couldn't afford heating, and cried silently so Tommy wouldn't hear. She was trapped. Hopeless. Alone. Until tonight. When Lucy first saw the man at table 32, her heart went out to him immediately. She recognized something in his eyes. That look of someone who'd been judged unfairly. Someone who'd been pushed aside. The hostess had treated him like garbage. The other waiters were ignoring him, focusing on the tables with rich customers who'd leave big tips. But Lucy couldn't do that. Her mother had taught her something important. Every person deserves dignity. Rich or poor, it doesn't matter. We're all human beings. So when the man ordered the cheapest beer on the menu, Lucy didn't judge him. She just smiled and said, "Of course, sir. I'll get that right away." But then something strange happened. When she came back to take his food order, the man looked up at her and said calmly, "I'll have the Emperor's ribeye, please." Lucy's heart stopped. The Emperor's ribeye was the most expensive thing on the menu. A massive steak aged for 90 days, served with truffle sauce and fancy potatoes. It cost £450, almost as much as her monthly rent. She looked at his worn jacket, his scuffed shoes. This didn't make sense. Was he joking? Was this some kind of trick? And, the man continued, watching her carefully, I'll have a glass of the 1995 Bordeaux to go with it. Lucy felt dizzy. That wine cost £250 per glass. Together, this meal would cost £700. She should have called Mr. Harrison. That's what the rules said. For any order over £200 from a walk-in customer, get the manager's approval first. Get their credit card before serving them. But when Lucy looked into this man's eyes, she saw something there. Calmness. Intelligence. And maybe a test? She made a decision. A decision that could cost her everything. Excellent choice, sir, she said quietly. I'll put that in right away. As she walked to the computer to enter the order, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type. She knew what would happen next. The system would flag the high-value order. Mr. Harrison would get an alert on his tablet. Sure enough, within seconds, Harrison was storming toward her. His face was red with anger. Carter, he hissed, grabbing her arm. What the hell do you think you're doing? That homeless-looking guy just ordered 700 quid worth of food, and you didn't get a card first. He didn't seem like he was joking, sir, Lucy said, trying to keep her voice steady. Are you stupid? Harrison's grip tightened. When he runs off without paying, that's coming out of your wages. All of it. And with what you already owe me, you'll be working here for free for the next 6 months. Lucy felt cold fear wash over her. 6 months of working for nothing. How would she pay for Tommy's medicines? But then she looked past Harrison's angry face toward table 32. The man was watching them. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see Harrison gripping her arm. He could see her fear. And he gave her the smallest nod. Like he understood. Like he saw her. In that moment, something changed inside Lucy. She couldn't explain it. But suddenly, she knew what she had to do. She had to take the biggest risk of her life. Have you ever been so desperate that you'd risk everything on a crazy hope? That's where Lucy found herself that night. As she served the mysterious man his incredibly expensive meal, an idea began forming in her mind. A wild, dangerous, possibly insane idea. This man was different. She could feel it. The way he watched everything with those quiet, intelligent eyes. The way he'd ordered that expensive meal without any show-off attitude. The way he'd looked at her, really looked at her, like she was a person, not just a servant. Maybe, just maybe, he could help. Throughout the evening, Lucy kept glancing at him. He ate slowly, thoughtfully. He asked her questions about the neighborhood, about London, about her life. Not in a creepy way. In a genuinely interested way. No customer had ever done that before. When she brought his coffee at the end of the meal, she noticed something that made her decision final. He paid in cash. Exact change. £703, including tax. Not a penny more or less. That wasn't normal. Rich people used credit cards. Poor people couldn't afford exact change on a meal like this. So who was he? The restaurant was closing soon. It was now or never. Lucy's hands were shaking as she went to the staff room. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. What she was about to do could get her fired. Could get her arrested. Could destroy everything. But Tommy's face flashed in her mind. Her sweet little brother, struggling to breathe, trusting her to save him. She had no choice. She grabbed a clean white napkin from the stack, found a pen in her apron, and began to write. Her handwriting was messy because her hands wouldn't stop trembling. But she wrote as clearly as she could. They're watching you. The kitchen isn't safe. Check the files in Harrison's office. He's poisoning the supply chain. Short. Direct. Terrifying. She didn't sign her name. That would be suicide. But she hoped how she hoped, that this mysterious man would understand. Would investigate. Would help. She folded the napkin into a tiny square and tucked it deep in her apron pocket. It felt like it was burning against her leg. When she returned to table 32 to clear the last dishes, her throat was so tight she could barely speak. Will there be anything else, sir? No, thank you, Lucy, he said softly. Everything was perfect. This was it. The moment of truth. Lucy's training had taught her to be smooth, professional, invisible. She began clearing the table with practiced movements. Coffee cup. Water glass. Dessert plate. As her right hand picked up the small tray where he'd left his payment, her left hand, hidden by her own body, slipped the folded napkin from her pocket and placed it on the table. But then her nerve broke. What if Harrison was watching? What if someone saw? In a panic, she immediately covered the napkin with the payment tray and picked it back up. The whole thing took less than a second. But it was a disaster. She'd just hidden the note again instead of leaving it. Wait! The man's voice stopped her cold. Her back was to him. Ice ran through her veins. Oh God! He'd seen. He'd seen her place it and take it back. Now he was confused. Or angry. Or, slowly, like a person walking to their execution, Lucy turned around. The man wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the empty table where the note had briefly been. Then his eyes lifted to meet hers. There was no anger there. Just confusion. And maybe disappointment. He'd wanted to see what she'd left. But she'd accidentally taken it back. Lucy's mind raced. She'd come this far. Tommy's face. Her mother's memory. The horrible things she'd seen in Harrison's files. She couldn't give up now. With a courage she didn't know she had, Lucy walked back to the table. Her legs felt like jelly. She could see Harrison across the room, starting to look in their direction. Without a word, she tilted the tray slightly. The tiny white square of napkin slid off and landed silently on the polished wood. She placed the tray down on top of it, deliberately this time, leaving it for him. You forgot something, she whispered, the words barely audible. Then she turned and walked away, not daring to look back. Her whole body was shaking. She felt like she'd just jumped off a cliff. Behind her, Daniel Reed sat very still. His heart was racing. He'd seen the whole awkward dance. The placing of something. The panic. The retrieval. And finally, the desperate second attempt. This girl had just tried to give him something. Something secret. Something important enough that she was terrified. He waited until she'd disappeared through the kitchen doors. Then, casually, as if reaching for his jacket, he slipped his hand over the payment tray. His fingers found the folded cloth. It was slightly damp from her nervous hands. He stood up, put on his worn jacket, and gave a small nod to Mr. Harrison, who was watching him suspiciously from across the room. Just a nobody leaving after an overpriced meal he probably couldn't afford. Daniel walked out into the cold London night. The door closed behind him, shutting out the warmth and golden light. He walked 2 blocks before stopping under a street lamp. His hands were steady as he unfolded the napkin. And then he read the words that would change everything. They're watching you. The kitchen isn't safe. Check the files in Harrison's office. He's poisoning the supply chain. Daniel read it once. Twice. 3 times. This wasn't a phone number. This wasn't a plea for money. This was a warning. An accusation. Poisoning the supply chain. His company. His restaurants. His responsibility. And this brave, terrified girl with the worn-out shoes had just risked everything to tell him. Looking back at the warm glow of the Royal Crown's windows, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Daniel stood on that cold street corner for a long time, just staring at those 4 terrible words. Poisoning the supply chain. If this was true, it wasn't just theft. It wasn't just one corrupt manager stealing money. This was something that could hurt people. Make them sick. Maybe even kill them. He pulled out his phone, a simple, untraceable one he used for these undercover trips, and called the only person he trusted completely. Robert? It's me. Robert Shaw was Daniel's right-hand man. They'd built Reed Pharmaceuticals together from nothing. Robert was more than an employee. He was family. Daniel, what's wrong? You sound. I need everything you can find on Gerald Harrison. He's the manager at the Royal Crown. Employment history, bank records, social media, everything. And Robert? It needs to be completely off the books. Nobody can know we're investigating him. There was a pause. Robert knew better than to ask unnecessary questions. How fast do you need it? Before sunrise. Bloody hell, Daniel. What did you find? Daniel told him everything. The dismissive hostess. The arrogant manager. The girl named Lucy with fear in her eyes. And the note. When he finished, Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said softly, if she's telling the truth, this girl is incredibly brave. I know. That's why I need you to find out everything about her too. Lucy Carter. Early 20s. Works as a waitress. Robert. I think she's in danger. I'm on it. But Daniel, if there really are files in Harrison's office, we need to get them before he destroys them. A surprise audit tomorrow won't work. He'll have time to hide everything. I know, Daniel said grimly. That's why I'm going back tonight. You can't be serious. You want to break into your own restaurant. I don't see another option. Robert sighed, a sound Daniel knew well. It meant Robert thought he was being reckless but would help anyway. Fine. But you're not going alone. I have a contact in London. Former MI6. She specializes in getting into places quietly. Her name's Victoria. I'll have her meet you. 40 minutes later, Daniel was sitting in a dark car with a woman who looked like she could kill you with a pencil. Victoria was maybe 40, with short gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Your friend Robert says you need to retrieve files from an office, she said without preamble. Tell me about the security. Daniel described the Royal Crown's setup. Top-of-the-line alarm system. Cameras. And Harrison's office would have its own separate lock, maybe motion sensors. Victoria smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm smile. I've broken into MI6 headquarters for training exercises. Your restaurant will be easy. But we can't just break in. Too obvious. She reached into the back seat and pulled out 2 gray uniforms. The restaurant uses Sparkle Clean Services. We're going to be their newest employees. The plan was brilliant. Robert, working his magic from Daniel's office, hacked into the cleaning company's system and added 2 new workers to tonight's shift. Created fake IDs. Fake background checks. By 1 a.m, Daniel and Victoria were walking through the service entrance of the Royal Crown wearing janitor uniforms, pushing cleaning carts, completely invisible. The real cleaning crew barely looked at them. They were tired, eager to finish and go home. Daniel and Victoria moved with purpose, like they belonged there. Office is down that hall, Daniel whispered. 3rd door on the left. Victoria nodded. You stay here. Be my lookout. If you see anyone coming, tap your earpiece once. Don't speak. Just tap. She'd given him a tiny communication device earlier. Now Daniel stood in the hallway, pretending to mop the floor, while Victoria approached Harrison's office. What happened next was like watching a magic trick. Victoria pulled out a small device and held it up to the security camera. The red light blinked and went dark. She'd looped the video feed. Then she knelt by the door, examining the electronic lock. It's a 6-digit code, she whispered into her earpiece. Any ideas? Daniel thought about what he'd observed. Harrison was arrogant. Self-important. Try 111111. Men like him think they're untouchable. Click. The door opened. Amateurs, Victoria muttered. Daniel watched the empty hallway, his heart pounding, while Victoria searched the office. Minutes felt like hours. There's a safe, she whispered. Behind the bookshelf. I need the combination. Daniel's mind raced. What would Harrison use? Something personal. Something he'd remember easily, but others wouldn't guess. Look around the room, Daniel said. Photos. Trophies. Anything with dates or numbers. There's a football trophy. Says 2019. And a photo of him wearing jersey number 9. Try 092019. A pause. Then, I'm in. Inside the safe was cash, a passport, and a black leather notebook. Victoria photographed every page with a specialized camera. She also found Harrison's computer was password protected, but Victoria plugged in a small device that began copying the entire hard drive. Got it, she finally whispered. Coming out. She emerged from the office, carefully closing the door behind her, resetting the camera. To anyone watching, nothing had happened. Just 2 cleaners doing their job. They left the restaurant the same way they'd entered. Invisible. Back in Victoria's car, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Robert. Files received. Oh God, Daniel. This is worse than we thought. While Daniel and Victoria had been inside, Robert's team had been analyzing the data. And what they'd found was horrifying. Harrison had been buying meat from a supplier called Westland Processing. It sounded legitimate. But Westland had been shut down 6 months ago by the health department. Condemned for bacterial contamination. Rats. Mold. Salmonella. Harrison was buying this toxic, contaminated meat for almost nothing. Then serving it to customers at premium prices. The difference in cost, hundreds of thousands of pounds, was being funneled to an organized crime syndicate. The note hadn't been a metaphor. Harrison was literally poisoning people. And there was more. Robert had found video files on Harrison's computer. Security footage from his office. The videos showed Lucy, her face pale and terrified, being threatened. In one video, Harrison leaned close to her and said clearly, "Your brother's sick, isn't he? Needs expensive treatment? Would be a shame if you lost this job. Would be a shame if I made one phone call and got him removed from the transplant list. I have connections, Lucy. Don't test me." Daniel watched the videos with rising fury. This wasn't just corruption. This was evil. Pure, calculated evil. Lucy hadn't been a disgruntled employee. She'd been a victim. A hostage. And she'd found the courage to fight back anyway. Robert's voice came through the phone, heavy with disgust. What do you want to do? Daniel looked at the London skyline, beginning to glow with the approaching dawn. Get me the FBI, he said quietly. And Robert, find out where Lucy lives. I want protection on her and her brother immediately. If Harrison even suspects she talked, she's in danger. The game was over. It was time for justice. Sometimes in life, there are moments when everything changes. When the truth finally comes to light. When the powerful fall and the brave are lifted up. This was one of those moments. At 11 o'clock the next morning, Lucy Carter walked into the Royal Crown for her shift. She hadn't slept. Every sound in the night had made her jump, terrified that Harrison had somehow discovered what she'd done. Tommy had asked her why she looked so scared. She'd lied and said she was just tired. Now, walking through those golden doors, Lucy felt like she was walking to her execution. Maybe Harrison already knew. Maybe the mysterious man had shown him the note. Maybe in a few minutes, she'd be fired. Arrested. Destroyed. The restaurant was in its usual pre-lunch chaos. Waiters setting tables. Chefs prepping food. Everyone busy. But then Lucy heard something that made her blood freeze. Everyone, stop what you're doing. It was Harrison's voice, but different. Higher. Panicked. Lucy looked up and her heart nearly stopped. 3 black cars were parked outside. And walking through the front doors, flanked by men in dark suits, was someone who made Harrison's face go white with terror. Lucy didn't recognize the man at first. He was wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. His hair was perfectly styled. He moved with absolute confidence and authority. But then she looked at his face. Really looked. And her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The man from table 32. The man in the worn jacket. The man she'd given the note to. But he didn't look poor now. He looked like a king. Mr. Harrison, the man said, his voice calm but carrying through the entire restaurant. My name is Daniel Reed. I own Reed Pharmaceuticals. I also own this restaurant. We need to have a conversation. Harrison's face had gone from white to gray. Mr. Reed, this is unexpected. If you'd called ahead, I would have. I was here last night, Daniel continued, walking slowly toward Harrison. I sat at table 32. Right over there, by the kitchen. You remember? The worst table in the restaurant? The one you give to people you think don't matter. Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound came out. I had a very interesting meal, Daniel said. The steak was excellent. The wine was overpriced but good. But do you know what was really memorable, Mr. Harrison? The service. He turned and looked directly at Lucy. His eyes were kind. Lucy felt tears starting to form. One person in this restaurant treated me with dignity, Daniel said. One person looked at a man in cheap clothes and saw a human being deserving of respect. One person had the courage to do what was right, even when it was dangerous. Harrison followed Daniel's gaze to Lucy. His face twisted with understanding and rage. Harrison started to say, but Daniel held up his hand. Mr. Harrison, I'd like you to come to your office, please. There are some people who'd like to talk to you. The men in dark suits were FBI agents. They followed Harrison down the hallway, with Daniel and Lucy behind them. Lucy felt like she was floating. This couldn't be real. The shabby man from yesterday was a billionaire? He believed her? He'd actually investigated? In Harrison's office, Daniel walked straight to the bookshelf and pushed it aside, revealing the safe. 092019, he said calmly. The safe opened. Harrison collapsed into his chair, all his arrogance gone. I don't know what you think you found, but... One of the FBI agents opened a tablet and turned it toward Harrison. On the screen were photos. The ledger. The invoices from Westland Processing. The bank transfers to the crime syndicate. We know everything, Mr. Harrison, Daniel said quietly. The contaminated meat. The money laundering. All of it. I want a lawyer, Harrison whispered. Of course, the agent said. You have that right. But first, we'd like to clear something up. He swiped to another image. It was a still from the video. Harrison threatening Lucy. Mr. Harrison claims this young woman was his accomplice, the agent said. He says she helped him cook the books willingly. Is that true, Ms. Carter? Lucy found her voice, shaky but growing stronger. No. He threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, he'd get my brother kicked off the transplant waiting list. He said my brother would die. I see, the agent said coldly. He turned to Harrison. We have the videos, Mr. Harrison. All of them. We know you blackmailed her. We know she was a victim, not an accomplice. They handcuffed him then. Gerald Harrison, who'd been so powerful just yesterday, who'd made Lucy's life hell, was led out of his own office in handcuffs. When he was gone, Lucy started crying. Not sad tears. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Daniel waited until she'd composed herself. Then he spoke gently. Lucy, I need to tell you some things. First, the debt Harrison claimed you owed? It never existed. It's erased. Gone. You owe nothing. Lucy's legs nearly gave out. I thank you, Second, Daniel continued, I've established a medical trust fund. It will pay for all of your brother Tommy's treatments. For the rest of his life. The best doctors. The best care. Everything he needs. Now Lucy really did collapse. She sat down hard in Harrison's chair, sobbing openly. Years of fear and exhaustion and desperation pouring out of her. And third, Daniel said, his voice warm, I'd like to offer you a job. Not as a waitress. As the Director of Employee Welfare for Reed Pharmaceuticals. You'll oversee a new program to protect workers from exploitation. You'll have the power to investigate complaints, to fire corrupt managers, to make real change. You'll report directly to me. Lucy looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Why? She whispered. Why would you do all this for me? Daniel knelt down so he was at her eye level. Because last night, when everyone else in this restaurant saw a poor man unworthy of respect, you saw a human being. Because when you could have stayed silent to protect yourself, you risked everything to do what was right. Because courage like yours is rarer than any diamond. And because people like you shouldn't be serving people like me. People like you should be leading. He stood up and offered his hand. So, Lucy Carter, will you accept? Lucy took his hand, her grip firm despite her tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I will. You know, we often think that heroes are famous people. Rich people. Powerful people. But that's not true, is it? Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones working double shifts with worn-out shoes. The ones fighting battles we know nothing about. The ones who choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. Lucy's story reminds us that one act of courage can change everything. That speaking truth to power matters. That seeing the humanity in others is a radical act of love. Daniel went looking for honesty and found something far more valuable. He found a person who reminded him why his work mattered. Why building a business should never come at the cost of human dignity. And Lucy, she discovered that sometimes when you're brave enough to ask for help, the universe sends exactly the right person at exactly the right time. Today, Lucy runs one of the most respected employee advocacy programs in the world. Tommy received his lung transplant and is thriving. And Daniel, he still takes those undercover trips sometimes. But now he brings Lucy with him. Two people from two different worlds working together to make sure everyone, rich or poor, is treated with the dignity they deserve. Because that's what really matters in the end. Not money, not power, but how we treat each other when nobody's watching. And that's a lesson worth remembering. The end.